There was an odd sound from the churches of all of England on September 9th that most of the English population hadn't heard ever in their life before, as muffled bells tolled for the first time in nearly 71 years, the country drowned in mourning. A beloved monarch, a caring grandmother, and a witty human being was no more. Queen Elizabeth lived a long and fulfilling life trying her best to be a champion of people despite her demure stature. People mostly knew her only as a queen of an empire, head of a troubled royal family, and a somewhat controversial figure, but there is more to the departed and beloved monarch of England, Scotland, and Wales. How did she do more than her duty as a princess during the Second World War? Which American presidents did she befriend and which did she troll? And what collections did she have that made her extremely human? Welcome to Nutty History. Today let's find out little-known facts you didn't know about Queen Elizabeth II. May she rest in peace. Queen Elizabeth II left the world with an unprecedented record of being the sovereign of the British Empire for 70 years and 214 days. She was just 25 when the sudden demise of her father thrust her to become the queen of a nation that was still reeling from the adversaries of the Second World War. She also had become sovereign of an empire which had the sun setting on it, and instead of attempting to tighten her clutches on it, she chose to gently let it reshape itself to the modern times. Despite being a monarch for such a long period, it might surprise you that she is still not the record holder for the longest reigning monarch. The title of the longest reigning monarch in the world still belongs to France's King Louis XIV. While Elizabeth famously became queen at the age of 25, Louis XIV was just 4 years old when he was named king. Louis, also known as the Sun King, officially reigned for 72 years, 110 days. Oh, so close. However, not a lot of people know that when Elizabeth was born, she was third in the line of succession, expected to go even further down the line. Her uncle Edward was first in line to succession, followed by her father, and then her. However, this was supposed to change as everybody expected Edward to get kids of his own who would get priority over Elizabeth and her father in the line of succession. So, all in all, there was little likelihood that Elizabeth would ever get a chance to be on the throne. But that changed in 1936, as her uncle Edward, who was already reigning as Edward III, abdicated the throne in favor of marrying a divorcee named Wallis Simpson.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as king and emperor. And now that I have been succeeded by my brother, the Duke of York, my first words must be to declare my allegiance to him.
Little Princess Elizabeth had recently finished her swimming classes when she heard chants of "Long live the King" outside. It is then she came to realize that her father, George IV, was the king now, and she was suddenly next in the line of succession. Elizabeth was only 10 years old, but she took her duty seriously, even back then, and especially when Britain got involved in the Second World War. When the United Kingdom declared war on Germany in retaliation for the invasion of Poland on September 3, 1939, Princess Elizabeth and her sister Margaret were evacuated from London to Balmoral Castle in Scotland. This is the same castle where Elizabeth II would take her final breath nearly 83 years later. But Princess Elizabeth and her sister spent the majority of the war years at Windsor Castle with their mother. And like her mother, Princess Elizabeth too wanted to motivate the people of her nation in those troubled times. So on October 13, 1940, the princess addressed the children who had to leave Britain due to the Blitz.
In wishing you all good evening, I feel that I am speaking to friends and companions who have shared with my sister and myself many a happy children's hour. Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
The Blitz, for those who do not know, was the bombing campaign Axis powers unleashed on Great Britain. Elizabeth, only 14 years old, made a moving speech to encourage fellow children of her country on the BBC's Children's Hour.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And we are trying too to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. We know, every one of us, that in the end all will be well.
But that was not all. She wasn't just a woman of words, but action as well. She learned to shoot combat weapons around this time and prepared to serve her country to a larger extent. When Elizabeth came of age, she insisted on joining the Auxiliary Territorial Service and took a training course in driving and vehicle maintenance at the major garrison Aldershot, qualifying just as the war ended. Although her first job during the Second World War was to inspect a military regiment during a parade at Windsor Castle on her 16th birthday. Her father also made sure that she was given no special treatment or titles during her tenure in the military. She enlisted as a second subaltern in the British Army and served as a mechanic. She was later promoted to a junior commander, which is the UK equivalent to a captain in the US military. But her truest friends were her pet corgis, who were also featured in her 2012 Olympics appearance with James Bond himself when she appeared to jump from a helicopter to announce the commencement of the Games. Though her first two corgis were Dookie and Jane, the Queen fell in love with Corgi Susan at the age of 18. Over the next 6 decades, the Queen would own 30 of Susan's descendants. She stopped breeding them in 2015 as she began to face her mortality and dreaded leaving puppies behind without proper care. Because of her time in the military, she was fully trained to drive not just regular cars but also heavy-duty vehicles. Once she was crowned as Queen in 1952, she needed no license to drive anymore. Well, being a queen comes with its perks, and as driving licenses in England were issued in her name, she needed none for herself. She was her own driving license, and the same logic applied to her passport too, as she didn't need one of those either. Elizabeth took full advantage of her liberty of traveling without a passport as she traveled through almost 300 states during her long reign. She also chose to not have a last name, and despite the fact that she didn't need a license, she had a thing or two to say to those states that wouldn't issue a driver's license to women. In 2003, the Queen was visited by the then Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The Queen was well aware of the fact that Saudi Arabia back then did not offer driver's licenses to women. Her Majesty offered the Crown Prince a tour of the beautiful Scottish countryside by herself and asked him to sit shotgun, with her in the driving seat. It's safe to say Prince Abdullah was both equally amused and terrified to be driven by a woman for the first time in his life. Not so soon after, Prince Abdullah was both astonished and yet even more frightened of how fast and yet how casually Elizabeth was driving the Land Rover, and yet she was in full control of the vehicle. The Crown Prince had to request his interpreter to ask her to slow down, and the Queen did so with a sly smile, well aware that the point was made. With a 70-year-long reign, Queen Elizabeth II witnessed many elected heads of state come and go. That includes 15 prime ministers of the UK that were appointed during her reign, and she also witnessed the appointment of 14 US presidents, of whom she met 13. From Harry S. Truman, who Elizabeth was acquainted with before they both ascended to their post, to Joseph Biden. Queen Elizabeth II met them all, except Lyndon B. Johnson, who she was supposed to meet but never got around to it. During her long reign, Queen Elizabeth II visited the USA many times, but a mishap in 1991 left the press dissatisfied as nobody lowered the podium or provided a pedestal for the Queen, who was nearly a foot shorter than President George Bush Sr. after his opening remarks. The newspapers the next day joked about the talking hat at the cost of the embarrassment of administrators. So when the Queen had to address Congress soon after, special precautions were taken for the Queen's speech. Ever so witty, she opened with,
"I do hope you can see me today from where you are."
The entire Congress burst into laughter, and just like that, Queen Elizabeth had once again won the hearts of her audience. During a 2007 visit, She gently teased President Bush Jr.'s verbal gaffe as he mistakenly mentioned the Queen's appearance during the celebration of the U.S. bicentennial in 1776 rather than 1976. Well aware of jokes about her immortality, she started the toast with,
"When I was here, it was 1776.
The president sheepishly responded that the look she gave him at his mistake was of only a mother to her child. Despite the mishaps, the Queen made lifelong friendships with many American presidents. She was especially fond of President Ronald Reagan, with whom she would like to go on horse rides. President Obama said she reminded him of his grandmother and considered the Queen one of his favorite people. She was also introduced to baseball by Bush Sr. Apart from Corgis, she held the record for the world's largest private art collection, which included thousands of paintings and some 500,000 photographs. But she was perhaps prouder of her over 5,000-plus hat collection. Also, due to a ridiculous but conservative law created in the 12th century, Queen Elizabeth II was the proud owner of all unmarked swans as well as all the porpoises and dolphins in British waters. By this law, even if you would catch a fish within 3 miles of a UK coastline, the royal family could claim it. Over the years, Queen Elizabeth was gifted many animals, such as an elephant, a pair of sloths, 2 black jaguars, Liberian pygmy hippos, a couple of beavers, several toucans, an anteater, an armadillo, giant tortoises, and kangaroos, and even several crocodiles. Crocodiles! And that happened several times. Who and why do they think it was a good idea? Anyway, she donated all these animals to British zoos, although she still owned a lot of racing horses for herself. The Queen was known to wear very distinct bright colors and hats over the years, so people could single her out even from a distance. She wasn't big on cosmetics and used rather inexpensive nail polish, but she had her shoes specially made by shoemaker Anello and David, which were then given to a special staff member whose job was to just break in the shoes for the Queen by wearing them and walking on carpet. The simple qualification for that job was to have the exact same size as the Queen. How cool was that? On the unfortunate day of the demise of Princess Diana, the Queen let go of protocol and chose to be with her 2 grandkids, William and Harry, instead of doing her duty as a queen. She chose to be a grandmother first. She also broke protocol by bowing in front of Diana's casket to pay respects to her departed daughter-in-law. It wouldn't be wrong to say that she was more human than people often credit her to be. Leaving behind 8 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 30 godchildren, Queen Elizabeth has left behind a legacy that could not be forgotten for centuries. Called Lilibet by her parents and Cabbage by her beloved husband, she will be remembered for her sharp wit, her easy approach, and her people-pleasing personality. She was particularly fond of champagne and used to drink it at night before bed. She once said, "For me, heaven is likely to be a bit of a come-down." Do you think we missed any lesser-known facts about the Queen? If so, tell us in the comments. As always, thanks for watching Nutty History, and do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.